side note. Okay, I love it. You click. We're in. We're in. Can I? I'll just.
So okay. you need to tell me something.
So this wouldn't be on ramp, but I will say, props to you for doing construction work in Crocs. And I'll just put it at that, because dude, I have suffered. I think you're starting to make connections now. I have suffered the pain of thinking like Crocs are the perfect work shoe for doing like almost any work around the house. I'm just saying you sent that note about, posted that note about I don't know what you're doing, some deck work, and it looked like you're wearing Crocs. And I had an incident the weekend before. I think it was Crocs. I could be completely mistaken, but it looked like you were wearing sort of like the comfy shoes, and you were kind of working at heights. And I thought, oh, I was scared for you. I was, here's the thing. Here's a big drop. Oh, what happened there?
I hit the wrong button.
Oh, geez. For a second there, I actually thought, I thought we were going back to like 2 weeks ago. Here's what I thought. Do you remember last year, maybe the year before, I tried to promote that hashtag dad shoes around the whole Father's Day? I don't know. Maybe I'll bring it back. We'll see. I started to think about, so can you confirm, are you prepared to confirm or not that you were wearing Crocs in that picture?
Okay. I was. Yes, okay. I was wearing Crocs.
So here's the thing. Will you confirm that you were working at heights?
Yes.
You were working at heights. So it got me thinking about sometimes the small kind of compromises we make as dads just to get the job done. But sometimes anyone on the outside that's kind of looking at those small compromises, they might kind of like, oh, come on, like there's a safer way, there's a better way. You know, how you sort of like hang up a picture, or the tie off the rope swing in the backyard. And I don't know, just in the spirit of the dad shoes thing that I dropped there, I was thinking about when I saw you with the Crocs, I'm like, man, like those aren't good climbing shoes. I had like a 75-year-old response, like, that's just dangerous. He should have on better footwear. What if? Now I was having a particularly sore left shoulder day. So, and that's an old story last year from when I broke my shoulder. So, yeah, that's all it was. I felt danger. I couldn't get over what the task you were doing. I got that you were sort of like setting up for summer and all that, but my mind kept on coming back to, but that footwear isn't safe.
Okay, so the first thing I think when you start talking like this is, okay, where did he see that photo? And then I think it's Instagram. So you saw the photos on Instagram. What happened was we have a pergola on our deck, and my wife wants more shade. So father-in-law bought this like canvas material that you put on top to block the sun or to whatever. So, you know, he comes over with the material, and my wife is like, grab your tools and stuff, you're getting up there type of thing. And at the back door, I have closed-toed Crocs, and I wear those when I go out like to barbecue or just to get on the deck, go in the backyard. So I'm like, okay. So I just slipped my Crocs on, climbed the ladder, and it was funny. It's funny that you saw that and you mentioned that, because I remember about 2 minutes up there, I'm like, okay, everybody just be warned that these things aren't going to stay on. Like they're going to fall off and fall right. They're going to hit you in the head underneath. So I managed to keep them on, but it was funny because a couple people commented, not like my family. They're like, do you want to go put some running shoes on? I'm like, no, I'm good. So anyway, that's funny how I'm like, are you good to go? You're like, yeah, I hit broadcast. And all of a sudden you're like, hold on, hold your horses. So that was funny. That was good. Okay, so in the on-ramp, you mentioned a couple of things that I just want to refer to. So one thing is you were taught, so we started this morning, and Chris was unsatisfied, or is unsatisfied with one of his webcams. There it is. He's showing it for anybody who's watching.
Call it out. You'd say it for what it is. Yeah, so Logitech. We're gonna lose all our sponsorship here.
What sponsorship?
I know. I don't know. It's like the C910, 920, something like that. So that's the piece.
Okay. I have the same one, and Chris and I were talking on the on-ramp that his is not performing as well as it should. Neither is mine. I have a colleague at work who has one, and she uses it on her thing, and she's never complained. So you and I got the garbage one, she got the good one. Okay, let's leave it at that. But Chris was talking about how he could just Starbucks this whole thing and walk up to his tech and just order what he wants. And his order was like right on. It was like a Starbucks all-star order, the way you connected the coffee you ordered to the tech you wanted. So I wrote down on my notes that now you make me feel like wanting to have a coffee. And I don't even drink coffee, but you made it sound so good. The second thing I wanted to say is, for those who are not watching, Chris is wearing like a t-shirt in his basement. So that's how you know that summer has arrived in Canada, because I think every episode is you wearing like a snowsuit, like that big sweater, your school sweater or whatever, and a toque. And today's just a baseball hat and a t-shirt. So
I wish it had been a snowsuit. All it was a hoodie, but sometimes here's the thing. So you look through the videos, and you can pull seasonality out of, I mean, you would never know it by the light in the basement. It's so artificially lit down here, right? The one window that gives absolutely no light whatsoever to my basement. It's very much, it hasn't even ascended to the prestigious level of man cave or workshop. It's just a cave. That's really all it is. Like open wires, dangerous, Survivor-esque challenges for me to get from the stairs just to this spot, right? Like the only way would be better is if there were crocodiles and open lava pits for me to get to here. Like there's nothing prestigious about this. But you could check seasonality here. You too. I never wore a snowsuit. I will say if I had one, I would be tempted to, because I think, a snowsuit is kind of like, it's like an Uber onesie. I would wear it if I could, but I just don't have one. But yes, hoodies, and yes, t-shirt today. I don't know why. It was what was on top of the laundry, I guess.
Okay. I'm going to keep going down my list, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, do it.
Okay. Show about nothing. So yesterday my kids were eating dinner, and my oldest son says, "So Dad, you have a podcast, right?" I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "What's it about?" And so I look at him, I smile, I take another bite of my dinner. And then my little one's like, "Yeah, Dad, what's your podcast about? We should search it out." And I said, "You should listen to it right before bed, because it'll put you to sleep." So we all get a laugh. And then he's like, "No, seriously, Dad, what's it about?" I'm like, "Well, my buddy and I, Chris, we talk about education." And now I'm feeling really like, oh, geez. Because I think our mission when we started DeCodEd Podcast was to talk about education and the intersection of us as parents, elementary teacher, high school teacher, all of that rolling into what we are, what we do each day in the work that we do at school as an educator. That was the vision. Have we met that? I don't know, because I think like we talk about all kinds of stuff that sometimes don't really relate to what's happening in the classroom, and then how we break it down to simplify it, or how we build it up to complicate it, which was kind of the point of this podcast. So I wrote down show about nothing, because I was sitting there talking to my kids and I was like, I don't really know what the show's about anymore. Like I felt like we did a really good job last week when I said that, hey, next week, let's talk about interview questions that I had to experience. And maybe you could talk about interview questions that you experienced when you were looking for your new role. And then like the biggest thing I wanted to talk about this week, aside from those interview questions, was Twitter and how you're back on Twitter, but that has nothing to do with you being an educator. And so now I'm conflicted. I'm bothered, because I say we, but you'll have to excuse me for that. I'm just including you because we're the ones who run the podcast. But have we lost our vision? I don't think we have. I think every now and again we talk about a topic that has really like got us going for the week, or sometimes we just get on and you say something that happened and we turn it into something. And sometimes we talk about the classroom. But so yeah, show about nothing. So I'm sure you'll have something to say about that. And then your return to Twitter, which I laughed at your first tweet. No shame, no this, no that. I just missed it. But I still think I'm still gonna say that you leaving Twitter for the reasons you left it, I just see you as an evolved human. Like, I see that you saw past what it is, you evolved past it, but then you craved, well, I'll let you explain it, but I think you craved the good parts of it, the parts that, not the addictive parts, not the parts where you're checking your phone every 10 minutes, but the parts where you're like, holy cow, there's an amazing conversation going on here. I'm jumping in because I want a piece of this. So now I'm gonna hand the baton to you, and you can address the show about nothing if you wish, and you can talk about your return to Twitter if you wish. But then as soon as you're done talking, I'm gonna tell you what I was asked at my interview.
Yeah, no, I'm all good with that. Yeah, so here we go. That's where we go from, I guess, nothing to something, and then maybe we can launch out of that back to nothing again, because it's a pretty comfortable default spot, I gotta say. I think that if I start to, go nostalgic on our podcast, my intent, actually, how do I come at this? I've mentioned this before, and I really like the analogy of being a chef, but let's say being a creator. And if you're a creator or a maker, I think it comes in stages. So like your level of, I don't want to say mastery, but your level of evolution as a creator, I would say for me, generally starts at an idea. You have something that occurs to you, some sort of it could be even just, I heard someone speak really, it was actually, is it Elizabeth Gilbert? I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert. Oh, the one that wrote Big Magic. She also wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And she speaks a lot about creativity. And she used this sort of example about how it's innate in all of us. Creativity is there, and we sort of learn it out of ourselves. We sort of impose structures on top of that create distance between us and our creativity. And then she also says inspiration is something that is around us. So creativity is inside, inspiration's on the outside. And part of staying tuned to your creative self is the work that's done is keeping your creativity looking inward and outward to inspiration. And inspiration will present itself, and then you got to grab it, or it's going to go on to somebody else. And she makes this really interesting connection between what's the term? But it's that theory of multiple discoveries at the same time of the same thing, but there's no connection between the two people. So these big aha moments in time could be in science, could be in politics, could be in art, where something very similar was created, yet there's no distinct connectivity or collaboration between those two events. And I forget what the big one she used, but wasn't the theory of evolution, but it was something that Darwin kind of decided or sort of picked up. And then there was another dude, and this is the perfect example. I don't remember this other dude's name, but there was somebody else that also discovered at the same time. Now that we could just say cross promotion. We could say, well, one person had, mastery of whatever their social media was at the time and kind of like put it out there first, right? That first tweet. So that idea of being creative and inspiration always being around you, for me, the curve of creativity. So what happens when you sort of go through that is that, so if me feeling creative, one of the outlets was doing the podcasting. That podcast that I jumped into was inspired by what I noticed in you, in Stephen Hurley, in Derek Rodenizer, in a few other people that I looked at, and podcasts that have nothing to do with education. The Hidden Brain, there was a lot of NPR stuff. So my drive to create I was inspired before I started creating. My curve of creating then was when I started getting on board with some mentorship, asking you some direct questions, checking out forums. Like I started to feed it a little bit, see if there's something to that monster. And then all of a sudden, the creativity took on a life of its own. I had the confidence to sort of take it for a walk. Let's see what happens here. All right, GarageBand. All right. We had conversations around, am I going to use Libsyn? Am I going to use Podbean? Like, where do I store this thing? Do I just keep it in Google Drives? So the monster's being fed again and again. It was very complicated in the beginning, very complicated because of the pieces that were needed to be creative. And all of them needed maintenance. None of them had sort of an autoplay to it. We talked about the grind. We talked about on ramp and off ramp, putting the bumpers in, putting music in. These are some of the conversations that I had with you and other people that are creating podcasts. The work it takes to produce an episode of, let's say, Chasing Squirrels is kind of the work. And we spoke to that. Like, when you get that grind tightened down, what do you do with the extra time? This podcast is the result of figuring out what you do with that extra time. It's that funny reactive result of, I enjoy doing this thing. I've got this project down to this certain kind of, I can get it down to like 3 hours for 1 hour of tape. Though I still really dig doing the podcasting and having these conversations. And just at that point where I was arcing, the opportunity presented itself to have a conversation like this. The inspiration's coming past my creativity. And I say to myself, I'm down with that. I would love to have just the one-to-one. We're not chasing guests. We're getting to the conversation about what happens in the week. If we started it by trying to define it too clearly. So we had this concept. If we had tightened it down, for me thinking backwards now, the risk would have been far too much like a staff meeting. Holding to the structure of what we have to talk about, what I realized, the flow comes from totally dissing that. Basically, totally dissing that. And I would say that if there was ever anything that we didn't get to, I think we got to it sometime. We landed on it. If there was ever anything we didn't explore deep enough, well, maybe that just speaks to the complexity of the work that we do. What I will hold, no matter what, is that every single episode was exactly what we should have talked about in that episode. Now, that gets kind of a little too, maybe, I don't know, out there. I am more than happy, I know this, I am more than happy to create a structured conversation with the intent of delivering. That's what Squirrels is. It is a structured conversation to a degree with some good flow, connecting with, an interesting person, but there's a deadline. There's a deadline to sort of put that stuff out. And I'm happy. I don't know. It's funny. I've never been asked directly. I've never been asked directly about DeCodEd per se. I've had people say they've noticed it. They've listened to it. I don't know who follows it. I've never felt not compelled, because I would feel compelled if I were asked. If someone were to ask, what is it about? I would probably have to respond, every episode is about something different. And it's entirely reflective of what Rolland and I went through in the week. It's responsive. It's agile. It can be kind of skittish too. But you know what? I feel like we're honoring the honesty of our weeks. And again, one of the interesting spaces that I don't know if we'll ever flesh out, maybe we'll have to be away from education, is that there's also another body of work that's happening around our conversation that we don't release. We can't release it. Because if we choose to use YouTube, the only way it gets captured is if we hit record. And that's the on-ramp and the off-ramp. Because there's gems in that space too. Sometimes it's highly personal, but sometimes it's just a necessary, kind of wick that we're lighting so that we can, okay, hit record, we're good now. And then we sort of arrive like today where all of a sudden I want to throw down on your dad's shoes. But it's I don't feel any compulsion. I'm using my words. I feel no compulsion at this point to justify the existence of this podcast or to make it clear to anyone else after the fact. The best way to experience it, I would say, is if you're not getting up at whatever 7:30 on Saturday morning, would be just to go back through and pick an episode, see if you like the flow, see if there's a topic there. It would be really hard to meta tag our episodes. You know what I mean? Because we'd be forced to use all those EDU tags. And then someone that was specifically looking for some hardcore strategies or some well-packaged, homogeneous kind of experiences, they're not going to get it. It's not going to be there. And I love the fact that your kid challenged you on this, because I would say your kid's question, everything your kid knows about podcasting is probably from you, right? Like that's, you know, your family knowing it's something that sits in your creative toolkit. Maybe your kids have been interested in doing podcasting, maybe not, but probably their perspective is shaped by you. I'd be more curious about what sparked the question. What made them suddenly notice that you're doing this work? How is it that you framed it in the past? Like, what have you said? Here's the thing. What have you said to your wife about the conversations we've had? What have you said to your colleagues about the conversations that we have? This goes all the way back to that original, you know, one of our first meeting points and talking about the affair, the sneaking away to do that sort of passion project. And you kind of have to have a certain protective element so that you can kind of get the ball rolling. You can get a body of work that's sort of sneaking away from your one part of your life to be able to dedicate energy to the other. And I would almost put in that same sort of space of, if you love to play basketball still, or if you love to, I don't know, eat chicken wings, but you feel like it's just particularly of your interest, what's your family's and your colleagues' perception when you sneak away to have this conversation in the morning? And my kids have no clue. I don't know. I have to be honest. My spouse, I don't think she's actually listened to a full episode of anything that I've created. If it's there if she wants to. That's the only question I've ever been asked that really got me thinking about. Well, there's been a couple. Sorry, there's maybe three. Jen Apgar asked me, why do I do it? What is podcasting to you? And that sort of brought out that whole extended reflection. It's, you know, you and I now are sort of in this collaborative, you know, reflection. The other question was asked by administrator, honestly asking, openly asking, are you allowed to do that? And another administrator asking, who's my audience? So those are just three kind of formative questions that I've been asked about it. But I've never been asked, what is it about?
Interesting. I appreciate you throwing down. You dropped so much there that I don't even know. It's hard for me to pick one of those paths and take it. I do really appreciate you talking about inspiration and creativity. And I really like how you mapped out how we've arrived to this podcast from your perspective. That's so cool to hear the path, right? Because I think that, and that's why I did my personal podcast, RC Connects, is because I wanted to hear about people's paths. What inspired you? What got you going? Tell us how you've arrived like to where you are today. The other day, I was messing around with the other podcast, and, you know, I felt a tinge of sadness that it was not there. But the sadness is far outweighed by kind of the person I am today, because I kind of grew out of a lot of that, like the time that it took to do it and to arrange meeting with people and stuff. Like, I know I've heard some of you, I don't think some people were like hammering me in a way to make it sound like we'll just use this tool and use that tool, and it happens when it happens. You don't have to do so much legwork. And I was like, no, I do, because that's part of who I am. That's part of the podcast that I created. and there was a certain amount of leg work, and that leg work was fun at one point, and then it became burdensome, like it was more of a burden, and then it was like, okay, no, this has to stop because it's not working for me anymore. This is not working. And it's not like I was getting paid. I didn't have any sponsors. It was just me and the people that I wanted to talk to. And then, you know what, I have to tell you, I got tired of people saying, yeah, I'll do it. And then they just, okay, so this is when I'm available. And like my availability was huge. It was like basically any weeknight after this time. And some people would give me the runaround, and I got to the point where I was like, just say you don't want to do it. Like, just say, you know what, I thought about it, I don't really want to do it. I'm like, awesome, thanks for like engaging me in conversation. And I'll leave you alone now. So I was looking at it, and I'm kind of proud of what is sitting out there that it's created, because I had a decent number of people listen to it, and that was cool too. Whereas with this podcast, I feel a couple things. Number one, I feel like neither one of us have really pushed this thing out there. We just haven't. Here and there, like I'll share your pictures that you share because I love your sketch notes on the episode. It's almost like it's just so clear to me what we talked about after I look at your stuff compared to my notes. But we don't really push it. Like, I don't think I've talked to anybody at work about this podcast. I think I may have mentioned my other podcast a couple of times here and there, but this one is like an underground type thing. I do this because I love it. And I think my kids are asking me, about questions about it, because to them, think about it from their perspective. Their father, who wakes up every morning really early to go to work, takes his day off, and he still wakes up early to sit on a computer and talk to another guy and record it, right? So they're like, what's so interesting about this? What's so engaging that my dad wakes up early on Saturday morning to talk to some guy about education? So to them, it's like, wow, this must be powerful for dad to be doing that, because when they think of me waking up early on a weekend, it's been to take them to a ball game or to travel to a fun place with them. So it's always been the early morning dad on the weekend has always been for something fun, hockey, football games, baseball games, right? Or one of their sporting activities. So they're like, how does this rank with those things? How could this be fun? Because they don't really know what happens, right? I can tell you that they enjoy my rig. They love my setup. They want to use my setup for gaming. They want to like record themselves gaming and using my mic and my stand and all that. Like they see it and they're like, this is legit. Like, dad has the stuff that we see YouTubers using when we watch them on YouTube. And our dad's not cool, but he has all this cool stuff. So there's that disconnect. Like, how can dad have this stuff and use it? And how can these really cool YouTubers use it? But they're not the same person. So there's that factor. And to be honest with you, I kind of enjoy, in a way, me being able to say that this is a show about nothing, even though it's not. It's kind of fun. You're right. Every episode, or most episodes, are independent of other episodes. We just get on. That's the beauty of this. It's like, okay, so we don't always talk about how much is happening in the classroom as I would have thought we would have. But I think people can get a flavor for who we are as humans. Like, so we wake up every morning, we work with kids, we teach them, we're like in this educational culture. But outside of that, like, we got questions, we got things we want to talk about. Like, here's a good one, because nobody listens to the podcast, so I can talk about this, but it's a bit of an on-ramp, off-ramp topic, but I'm gonna navigate it. I'm gonna explore it in a way that's not gonna get me into trouble, I don't think. So here we go. So the other day on Twitter, I was all pumped. I was sitting on my rear end watching TV, and nobody was around. Like, so it's not like it was taking up family time, but I'm scrolling through my feed and I see that some kind of chat is about to start. I'm like, okay, well, I've got some time. Maybe if the questions, if they speak to me, I'll jump in and I'll answer the questions. Because here's the thing about Twitter chats that a lot of people don't think about. People think you got to jump into Twitter chats and you have to provide information for other people. You have to have gold nuggets. You don't. I use Twitter chats to reflect on my practice. So when somebody asks a question in a chat, I answer the question thinking about who I am as a teacher, what I'm doing in my classroom, and how it might work. Or maybe I do have something to offer, but it's that reflection piece. I get to think about my work, and then I post the information. Then people think, well, they can think whatever they want. They can think, oh, that sucks. What's Rolland talking about? Or Rolland's got gold nuggets. No, it's a reflection. It's for me to reflect on my practice. So it's benefiting me by me participating in that chat, even though nobody will read it, or I might have one follower, whatever. So they drop the question and boom, I have nothing positive to say. And I won't even tell you what the question was, because then it'll give away like what I might say negatively. So they drop the question. I'm like, literally, Chris, I'm like, I'm out. I cannot be part of this conversation because I had nothing positive to say. So as then I'm reflecting, right? I'm like, holy cow. So with respect to this question and my work at school, in a school, I got nothing positive. So what does that tell me? It tells me a couple of things. It tells me, oh dear, number one, you're not going to talk about this publicly because you're just not, number one. Number two, what have I been part of at my workplace that I did not add anything positive to the realm of which they were talking about? So then I was thinking about myself, who I am, and how I've not been part of a solution. In fact, I think I've been part of the problem, which is whatever, it happens to everybody. Do I want to be part of the solution? Not really, because I'm leaving. I've decided to go to another school, teach another grade. I've decided that what I'm doing now is I don't want to be doing what I'm doing now. That's a good thing because that's good. I'm moving on. I'm doing something different. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting. But it relates to my work. So right now I'm talking about Twitter. I'm talking about Twitter chats. But as a teacher, I like to use the chats as a way to reflect on my practice and to share things that maybe other people, something might be there that can help them, or something might be there that can help them reflect on their work or who they are or whatever, right? Like I'm hoping something positive comes out of my tweets. And then there was another tweet that really resonated with me. Refrans said something about, like, I don't even remember, something about Twitter and like using it and not using it. And my response was that lately I've been hearing a lot from people like in my work circle saying like, what's the point? You go on Twitter and like, what's the point? And and my response to Refrans was, yeah, people, they get the tool, they go on, but they expect people. Oh, so her question was like, how many people use Twitter and feel like people are hearing what they have to say? And my response was something like, it's a tool, and people get bothered when they tweet something out and you don't have 800,000 people following you saying something about the thing you just said, right? Like, people get on Twitter and they think that everybody should care about what they say. And they might not think that, but a lot of people think, well, what's the point of using it? Nobody's hearing me. Nobody's going to comment. And if that's why you're using it and you're not a celebrity, then chances are you're not going to get what you're looking for, right? For me, it's not what it's about. And for me, we're talking about years in the making here. Like, I have, I don't know, a little over 4,000 followers. A lot of those are robots. A lot of those are, I have no idea why a lot of those people follow me, right? Because you and I have talked about this. You and I have talked about following people and unfollowing people. And I do my best to try to follow as many educators that I find fascinating. Like, I see something, I read it, I'm like, oh, that's an educator. I really like what they said. I check out their space, and if I like their flow, I follow. And when I tweet, I don't expect people to like jump on what I'm saying and like it or dislike. I'm not expecting that. So anyway, long story short, I think that as I listen to you talk about our podcast and where it's come from and why it is and what we talk about, we are people who are teachers. And what happens at school, we bring back to this in like the umbrella of the week. And I will say one more thing directly related to my work and the podcast, and something interesting that happened this week. And then I'll let you speak. And then I have to say something about interviews because I have to. I got out of my car one of these days this morning, and I had nothing in my hands. I had no bag of work. I had no bag.
Good plug. Good plug.
I had my name tag was around my neck. My sunglasses were on because I had morning duty, sunny out, and I had my keys to get into my classroom. So I get out of my car and I'm walking towards the door, and a colleague says, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "Good morning. What's up?" And they're like, "You don't have a bag? You don't have a lunch bag? You have nothing? How can you have nothing?" And I'm like, "It's really easy. I decided not to take anything yesterday, not to bring anything today." And I was like, in those 2 minutes, I was like, "What are you trying to say about me? Like, are you trying to say that because I didn't have a bag of work, that somehow I was off the clock? Or are you jealous that I don't have anything in my hands? Or are the optics really bad that a teacher has arrived to work and doesn't have anything in their hands? Like, what are you trying to say here?" That's what I want. What are you trying to say?
Let me jump. We talked about this in the bag of work episode. Remember, watching the people leaving on the Friday. The Friday is the more powerful one, but leaving any night, because there's so much that pings off this. You're still sitting in your classroom taking care of your work. And let's say you're still sitting in your classroom taking care of your work, and you know that no matter how much work you do in that classroom at the end of the day, you're still probably should be taking some stuff home that night. And then you see the person walking past your classroom, and they've got their coffee cup, or even worse, they've got a thing that has nothing to do with school. They're walking out the school with like their golf clubs, or or something that, they're walking out in their bathing suit, something that suggests they have left their work day behind. I feel the exact same kind of complex feels when on a Friday I see one of my colleagues pull into the parking lot in a camper van, the canoe on top. I'm like, that dude has no intent of doing any schoolwork this weekend. That's not a bigger vehicle to take home a bigger bag of work. That individual is going and having fun. And it's hard not to become judgy. We're in the same ecosystem of conversation. There's the expectation. It's such the bizarre thing, the expectation that in order to be qualified as a teacher, to declare that you are a teacher, the expectation somehow that you should be always like, covered in Post-it notes, highlighters, Sharpies, and on your way to a duty. It's just, I'll bring it back to the interesting. So part of, I'll resend that Benjamin Dockstader article to you, because he starts his blog post with two different tweets that lead into his POV. But the two different tweets is from one dude that's talking about how teachers take the summer to reflect on their practice, and they're still developing their craft, and they think about their students every day, and they're learning new lessons. So basically they leave on whatever the last day of the school year and right away clock in at home into something else. Now, that may be true for some, might be true for some, but I don't think it's a truth for all. And I forget who posted that. And then Doug Robertson posted the counterpoint saying, basically, there's no way that you can become the better version of yourself when you're constantly immersed in self. You can't. You have to extend outside the bubble. And I would argue that would be the same. Like, you can only watch so many Twitch videos about playing Fortnite to claim that you have any mastery of Fortnite. At some point, you got to test that metal, give it a try, game it a little bit, see if you can survive to the end of it, by all means, go back and watch it again. Go back and watch it again. But you can only sort of claim there isn't as much growth there. So I think teaching is very similar. I think there's a necessary distance that has to happen at some point. For some people, they'll go hardcore the whole school year. For others, they're measuring it on a daily basis. They're like, I'm not going to take my stuff home. The funny thing in this is that it still gets so damn judgy. It still gets so damn judgy. You walking in the morning looking like you should be on holidays is a good thing. It's a reminder to others that teaching is a human endeavor. It's a human endeavor. If we're going to be measured, there is so much in the system that measures us by static statistics and numerical outcomes. You coming in with sunglasses and maybe carrying the what's that called? I forget what it's called, but like the big Tim Hortons old school coffee mug, whatever you have in it, right? I love that it could be perceived like somehow you're betraying the code. What's up with that, man? You should already be, as soon as you drive in it should be Pavlovian. You come in the driveway, you're in teacher mode, dude. And the last thing just to throw in there, what I love is you have a really sweet counterpoint to this of realizing the humanity of being a teacher. Last week when we talked about a little bit of that lifting the veil moment when you walked onto the kids' playground to reconnect with them after the car was going to pull away. Stepping outside of your head a little bit and realizing, wow, I've never kind of been in this zone before. I've just dropped the kids and we've kind of gone on, but I need to kind of exist in that space a little bit. That's the good reminder of the humanity in the relationship. You coming in with sunglasses and maybe not carrying schoolwork in is the reminder of the humanity in the work. Somebody leaving at the end of the day. The bag of work was a hilarious episode. I love how we've brought back to this, but also reserving the judgment, because it is ultimately, if that person isn't taking something home, it has nothing to do with you sitting in your classroom, still doing work at the end of the day. Zero to do with your practice, zero to do with how good you are as that other teacher. But I love the moments where people dare to kind of step out of that and somehow say, why aren't you doing what I'm doing? Because what I'm doing, I believe to be the best version of whatever this job is. So why aren't you doing the best version of what I'm doing? And it's so trippy when people, and what I love is it's a gift when people actually trip over that, because often those judgments stay inside people's heads. They don't even bother to step out. They won't even say it. They'll just walk away thinking something. Oh, that's some lazy dude. It's when we have these conversations, we poke at each other a little bit, especially in jest, if you can get there, walk out the door next time and do the, my bag of work is bigger than your bag of work kind of conversation. It's guaranteed it'll get a laugh or some sort of like, wow, that was kind of weird. But then, yeah, like, why am I carrying such a big bag of work home? I love that. I love that moment, dude.
The bag of work seriously it's universal. And
it is.
For teachers, it's universal. And I get a kick out of it now, watching people come in with their bags and leaving. I'm dying because
we know. There's source code to this. We're on the other side. This is what the DeCodEd was about. Like I said, I'll just say that was one of our best episodes, just kind of grabbing onto that thing like, God, why do we do this?
Yeah.
Get off this train. Why do we do this?
Why do we do this? And another thing is, I know, I'm not an after school guy. I don't like to, I feel very uncomfortable sticking around after school just to say I was there. Like, that really bothers me. I'm more of I like to do stuff. Like, I like to get to school early, but my whole world has shifted. Like, when you have children and you have obligations, everything shifts. So like, my children, I drop them off at school, then I go to work. So I don't get to work in the morning as early as I'd like, but it doesn't shift my after school program. Like, I'm not staying after school for an hour just to say I stayed for an hour. I'm not doing that. And so I work at recess. I work during my prep time. I work during my lunchtime. If you put all that time together, it equals to more than an hour, right? So it's after school. So why am I staying after school when I can get all this stuff done during the day? That's number one. There are still people out there that judge when I'm leaving. So school ends at 3:10. If I'm leaving at 3:20, 3:25, they're dying. I know they're dying. They're like, oh, he's leaving early again. How does he do his job? Oh, how do you not do your job? What are you doing all day? Like, if you're gonna judge me, then like, how about I judge you back? What are you doing all day? You're just sitting around doing nothing and you just save it for after school. Now, this might shift again when my kids are older. Next year, bell times are different for my wife and myself and my kids. This year they are kind of close together. Now they're not. I'm a late morning starter now. Like I start like 40 minutes after my kids start school. Am I right? Yeah, maybe more. I start school almost an hour after my kids start school. My wife starts school 20 minutes after my kids start school. So the mornings, I'm in charge 100% of those mornings. Even my wife said, she's going to have to skedaddle a little bit earlier every day because she's going to have to report home after school a little bit faster to so that the kids aren't home alone for more than a certain amount of time because they're going to be walking home next year. So that means I'm on morning duty. Like I'm in charge of the morning. I'm going to be making them breakfast. I'm going to be packing lunches. I'm going to be making sure that they get to school in one piece. That's my job. Now, before, it's still my job, but it was tighter timeline. So I was always like, okay, kids, like dad has morning duty this week. You need to be a little bit better this week than last week because we can't slack because I have duty and I need to be at school at a certain time. And people laugh at me for that. They're like, oh, you're really strict with yourself on getting to school. Yeah, I'm not walking around looking for rules to break.
I'm the same way. Same way.
I'm not looking like, oh, I'm not following that rule. There are some rules I don't like, but I'm not looking to break rules for fun. So drop the kids off, make sure they're secure, get in the car, get to work, make sure I get my duty, right? But anyway, so next year, I'm going to be ending school late. Like I'm going to be dying, I think, for the first little while because I've never had a school end so late. So I'm going to be looking at my watch like, oh, my former colleagues just left. Oh, my wife's done. Oh my God, my kids are done. Like everybody in the world's finished work except me. That's going to be weird at first. I know it because that's who I am. But I'll get used to it. And then once my day ends, my wife will have been done for 45 minutes her work day. Okay. I'm not sticking around school for an hour unless I have to. But I'm not. I'll get my stuff done in the morning because I'll be at school relatively earlier than the bell. And then I'll work through my recess and I'll work through my prep and I'll work through my lunch like I always have done. It's nothing new. And if there's not a staff meeting after school or some kind of meeting that I need to be at, I'm going home. And you know, when I started my career, oh, here's some DeCodEd. When I started my career, you know, I would stay because I was like, oh, well, I guess you don't leave right away. I'm not a slacker. I just don't want to be there. I'm done. I finished. But I would stay. But then the funny thing is, as you get older, some things just become non-negotiable. Like, and then people don't have as much influence over you as they once did when you were younger. So I'm at a point in my life and my career where it's kind of liberating. I'm really losing the ability to care about things that I shouldn't care about. And it's kind of nice. Like my wife, the best is when my wife says something about it, because for years, my wife has been irritated with my mode of operations. And I've slowly shifted over the past 2 years to the point where my wife will say, did you say that out loud to somebody? And I'm like, yeah, I did. And then she'll say, were they offended? Like, were they bothered? And I'm like, I don't know. And I don't care because I just don't care.
What part of it with your mode of operation? What was the, not specifically the conversation there, but what was the thing that you were being challenged on?
I was being challenged on, well, you know what? You've asked a great question. And I don't think I'm ready to talk about it here.
Okay.
I think it's certainly I'm willing to talk to you about it in an on-ramp or off-ramp, but
Fair enough.
But that's good that you asked me the question, and then I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, how do I feel about this question? Do I want to answer this question? And the answer is no, I don't need people to know. This is something you and I can talk about aside.
Yeah, for sure.
But I want to say grown, developed in this different path. And I just don't care, because I'm not walking around as a teacher and as a person. I'm not walking around trying to make people feel bad. That's not why I teach. That's not why I work with kids. But sometimes I say things that some people might say, well, that was a little abrasive. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry that you may feel bothered, because I don't walk around trying to bother people, but I'm not sorry for what I said.
Yeah.
And I'm not sorry for my thinking. That's how I feel about this topic or this issue or this question. And that's just the way it is. I don't think I was like that a couple of years ago. I think I was just walking around trying to please everybody at any cost. And there's a cost. The cost is that people just, they either disrespect you because you have no respect for yourself, or they think you're a great guy, but they don't really know who you are because you never really give them who you are. So it's just funny because my wife will say, hey, that sounds abrasive. And I'm like, whoa, I'm just being me. And if they don't like me, then they don't like me. And that's okay, because there are people who like me. So it's good. So my talk is really deviated, and you probably, I'm going to let you talk. And then and then no matter what you say, I'm going to talk about the interviews for
We're going to pivot. We'll pivot. I'll just say I've been challenged in much the same way. Let's say I'm coming from the other side of this, is that it would have been interesting if you and I had met in a staff situation, like if we met in a different way. So if you and I had met in one of the contexts, because you and I taught, I mean, you and I think I think I don't want to, I don't want to shape this like a compliment, but I think that the fact that you and I are talking openly about practice on open air live is a measure of, there is when I'm in the few people that I've mentioned to that we do this live, they're like, really? Like, and I'm like, yeah, it's like, there's no edits here. It's if you want to be there. I think we even kind of threw down originally, like, it'd be cool if people would sort of message us while we had the this sort of pie in the sky idea. By all means. Yeah, I think one of the best moments that comes back was at the Ontario Summit, where a measure of our openness was tested when that teacher walked by, and I asked her, hey, you want to be on a live podcast? And she's like, what? Like, yeah. And she just sat down and jumped in on the combo there. Like, that was really cool. Like, I would say that's next generation podcasting. I haven't come across that idea of something that is synced as a live broadcast, but also then gets compartmentalized like a podcast. And I mean, I will say that specifically to the EDU universe. I haven't come across that. It's canned to a degree. It's controlled to a degree. So I love the open reflection that you and I have done. One of the reflections that I do in this, the thinking that I do, is I wonder what you and I would have been like had we met in one of the scenarios that we describe about our past that we've learned about teaching. What's the currency that has connected you and I in a space like this? And would it be different if we had met, if you were somehow, same board, right? We sort of connecting over some collaborative project or something. Because in some ways I am the antithesis. I'm the foil. I'm the antithesis to you. I'm the yin, the yang, because I'm on the other side of that, is that I started from the space of I've been called Kurt. I've been called Kurt several times. And so me just sort of laying it out as it is, that's my starting point, not the starting point of worrying about pleasing. I've never been a people pleaser. And sometimes I make it like, I can, the other day. So my colleague right now is we're having conversations about me transitioning out of program. And there's elements of it that I understand that are upsetting, because it's sort of like, it's the breaking up of the team. she has openly said that she enjoys working with me. Like it's been a good 2-year run of us working together. She feels she's changed, she's grown. And she walked into the room, because we have the 2 classrooms side by side, and I don't know, it was some song. She was humming some song, and the lyric that she threw out was something about being hard to love. And I just sort of like quickly threw down. I said, that's exactly me. That's exactly, like I am entirely sort of difficult to love. It's my personality. It's kind of my benchmark starting. So when you talk about that stepping forward into being, let's say, more straight up and sort of just laying out, connecting the circumstances with your sort of like your interior, exterior, I'm doing the same thing, except the exterior that I'm trying to connect with sometimes is the caring about what people think. I'm trying to find that happy middle in the middle. And it ain't easy. It ain't easy. My spouse and I often talk about, we loved watching Curb Your Enthusiasm, because Larry David, like back in the day, we actually started to talk about how necessary sometimes it is to be Larry David and just say the words that are there. Call it, like, speak to exactly what's there in front of you. And if you happen to have something that's a little bit on the edge, take a chance and say it. Measure what will actually happen while it's happening. Don't measure it by not jumping into it. Oh, I shouldn't say this right now because that person's going to be upset. And then you never test the waters. Try saying it once or twice. See if that your sort of like anxious projection actually happens. Now, I will say it often does. It often does. In my experience, I say the thing, I'm like, yeah, I could have said that in a different way, because I'm trying to connect with the wholehearted part of it. I'm coming from the Kurt and try and connect with the heart. If you were starting with the heart and trying to connect with the Kurt, then there's a space in there. I don't know. There's the human space. And it makes me wonder how you and I would have been if we had met as colleagues, not in this context.
That's interesting. Very interesting. But okay, interview questions. But before I jump there, when you and I met, it was in a very open educational space, right? You and I met, well, we met online, like in Twitterverse, but when we actually met face to face, we were in Toronto at the help me.
Well, it was the CEA. It was previous. It wasn't the EdCan network yet. It was just the Canadian Educators Association, the exchanges.
Exchanges.
The regional exchanges, yeah.
Regional exchanges for the Canadian Educational Association, where we were talking about, how do we see education? What needs to change to make it the way that we'd love to have it? That type of thing. And that's where we met face to face. And so we were fortunate in that I think we got to meet in a very open, liberal environment where we were going to be talking about change, where we were going to be talking about uncomfortable things. Well, they might be uncomfortable topics like within the rigid system of your school board, but we were outside of that. We were in like education heaven, where we could talk about what would make it better and how could we get there, right? And there was our group was diverse. There was a ton of people from different realms, and I loved it. I loved that. So I'm glad that we got to meet in that space, because I think it allowed us to be open and to understand that the reason why we were both there was because of our capacity to be open. I think that's what I'd like to think, because anybody who says otherwise, I would disagree with. Andrew Campbell was there, and he would probably tell you that he maybe came with a darker perspective, but I disagree 100%. Listening to him talk and his ideas was fantastic. And he's always open to talking to people about change and the good that it brings and the bad that it brings. But anyway, that would be cool to like, oh, hey, Clough, I'm Chidiac. Nice to meet you. I teach down the hall. It'd be interesting to see how that would have worked. And it'd be interesting to have gotten to know you in your Kurt stages.
Do you find me Kurt? Do you think I'm Kurt?
Not at all. No.
So is that, and see, this is where I'll do the self-examination. Is that a measure of how it's landing with you, or do you think it's more of a measure of me sending?
I think it's both. Like, I know
Okay.
people right now that have done nothing to send negative vibes my way, but I just don't like them. I just don't like them. I don't receive them well. I think that's on me because the way I perceive what they're putting down, and I don't believe that they're putting things down on purpose to not be kind to me or to throw me off. I just don't like them. We just don't, there's no, one of my favorite things to do, one, one of my favorite things to do is when I meet someone and I get the vibe that they don't like me or they're not liking me, is I continue to talk to them. I continue to push them in that space because we're in a social space. Now, sometimes I abandon ship. Okay, I'll be honest. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I can see the body language. I can see that this person's body's halfway out the door. So I'm just going to stop and let them go. But sometimes I see the body's halfway out the door and I don't slop and I wait and see what they're going to do, how they're going to take themselves out of it. That's also interesting to me very much. Okay, interview. I have to tell you, when I was interviewed for any teacher who wants to get a job has to be interviewed. And in today's day and age, in the area where I live, here are the things that people are going to ask you about. I never wrote this down. I just wanted to do it from memory. So it's in no particular order, but my school board is big on numeracy right now, which I would say most school boards in Ontario are on the numeracy wave because it's a big deal. Scores on EQAO need to go up, and kids need to learn how to do math to be able to like go out and live in the world. So one of the questions was numeracy. What does it look like in my classroom? So basically I had to talk about my numeracy program, how I run the show, what what the kids are doing, what I'm doing. So numeracy was big. Another question was, what's one of my perceived weaknesses and what am I going to do to like work on them and improve? So that was a good one. Another one was about extracurricular activities and how do I, like as a person, what can I give to a school via extracurricular activities? So, be prepared to talk about your gifts and your talents and how you can bring them to the school so that you can benefit the staff and the students. There was a question about my Catholicity. So I work in a Catholic school board. So the question was, how do I model that Catholicity? How do I model my faith for others? How is it like entrenched in the work I do and the classroom that I'm responsible for? Great question, obviously, and it's going to happen whether they ask you straight up or not. You should talk about it. If you're going to work for a Catholic school board, you should talk about how your faith guides you in the work that you do. Oh my God. There was a question, okay, spec ed around IEPs. Like how do you deal with IEPs? How do you deal with special education? There was a question on differentiation. How do you differentiate for your students? I think those are the ones that stand out to me. There was probably a couple more, but I don't know why they're not hitting me. Then there's always time at the end for you to ask questions. So I was asking questions around leadership. I wanted to know from this administrator, like, kind of what can you offer me? Because this is kind of the path I'm on. These are the things I'm interested in, what I'm doing. So are you open to like supporting me to, being an informal mentor around leadership in this way or that way? And it was interesting because I know the principal who's interviewing me, but I wasn't expecting him. He had a list of questions for me. Like they were sitting in front of me. He's like, here are the questions. And I was blown away because I assumed from what I knew of him that the interview would be more of a conversation, which it turned into. It definitely turned into a conversation because I'm sorry, I can't just sit there and read the question and answer the question. You gotta flow, kids. You gotta be flexible in these situations. You have to be able to answer the question, but to also be able to throw in who you are, right? Like, are you a rigid person who would just sit there and answer the questions word for word verbatim? Or are you gonna smile and have a conversation as you flow through the questions, right? And you gotta be you. Like when I answered the question about my weakness, I was scared to death because here I had two administrators in my system who I would like to think I bring value to my school board and to my schools and to the people I work with and the kids I work with and the parents I work with. And so you want them to leave feeling good about you, whether they hire you or not. You want them to think, okay, this guy, he brings value. He knows his stuff. He does his job. That's ultimately what you want. So when they ask you about your weakness or your next step, it's scary. And you know what? I have to tell you, I went for the gusto on that question. In my opinion, in my mind, the way I answered that question was going to make me or break me. Now, I don't know the administrator's perspective on this. It's just, I'm telling you how I feel. When I told them what my perceived weakness was or what my perceived next step was, I was scared to death, because I was basically telling them that, I don't feel comfortable doing a particular area of work that is a big area in my board. But I mean, I said, but I do it, and I think I'm effective. Like, when, I'm effective, kids are learning, kids are doing well, I'm teaching it, and I'm following the way that you want it taught. But do I feel good about it? No. And so that's, I was like, well, they're either going to be like, this guy's not for this school, or this guy's not for how I run my school, or whatever. So those are the questions that I can remember. Those are the big ones, though. Obviously, that's why I remember them, because they're the big ones. Oh, there was a question about, like, who are you and what do you bring to this staff? And why do you want to come to this school? What is it about this school why did you apply for this school? What do you want from this? Why do you want to go there? You got to be prepared. You got to be prepared to talk about, you can't just say, oh, because it was one of the 50 things I applied to. That doesn't sit well. You have to actually genuinely, there has to be something about why you're applying there. And if, you know what, that's not going to happen for every job. You're not going to apply for every job and be like, yeah, this is why. Sometimes you're just going to be like, I need a change. And that's fair too. So I'm going to be quiet now, because it took us like an hour to get to what I wanted to talk about, to bring value to the show about nothing. But that was my experience.
I love one of the most challenging, everything that you mentioned sort of rings true as a possibility in the job interviews I've had as well. The thing that you really got me thinking about, though, is that the discussion around character, which for me is connected with the spirituality. It has a particular seating in the spirituality of the Catholic board. Like, you can get to the moral, the ethics, and the measure of character through, as you said, the Catholicism of the candidate. Like, it is territory there, right? It is that there's a space there to speak directly to it. And you can come at it, it could be come at it a very academic sort of fashion. And talking about your strategies for conveying the religious information, or the character ed that's embedded in the religious information. You can be very technical, I'm sure. But then it could also flip to that open discussion about spirituality. Like, it opens a door to a space that isn't as clear in the public system. There isn't a question where you can sort of like tag on a discussion about moral development and character ed development as clearly. It's very technical it's specifically technical in the public system. And it made me think about, I've said before, we had our episode talking about preparing, I think it was a pre-Christmas. And so there was a season, there was a religious season that was sort of, you were coming into and talking about building that spirituality in the children. And I'm in awe, because my nearest equivalent of language is language that you have as well, because it's about, I'm hearing it as character matters, a little bit about mindfulness. It's sort of like there's these a little bit looser spaces in the public system that you can harmonize so well with Catholic spiritual belief. Like, you have a really sweet space. I'm not saying it's any simpler to convey it or work through it, but there is a nice backbone there to be able to fall upon or step in line with. And I was thinking about in the interviews, how different that would be if there was something clearly unifying in that character zone, sort of speaking to character development of children. We have separate tools, but there isn't a harmonizing tool to bring it all together. So I think it's a cool question, a challenging question. In the public system, I don't know if it's any easier to answer in your interview context, but I appreciate the value of that type of a question. I really do. Because teaching character is difficult. It's incredibly difficult. It's like, even with or without a religious sort of like framework to speak within. The other thing that I've had that type of an interview. So my interview for my current program, working with the students on suspension and expulsion, when I applied for it, my interview was at the board office. So because it's a regional interview, it's considered they call it a centrally allocated position. So there wasn't necessarily a specific school I was going to be at. It's a board position. So I interviewed at one of our board offices. And when I arrived, I had to write an essay. So there were a few prompts that I had to write a response to. That essay in itself was a part of my interview. So at the interview, there was the head of where two principals that I knew of and a superintendent. And I was at one end of a very long table. It was very much like a boardroom. So I sat down at one end and they were all the way at the other end. It was noticeably slightly comical, the distance between. I thought this is exactly how you sort of like imagine a panel-based interview, that distance. The only thing that was different is that it wasn't sort of them sitting at a table and then I'm sort of feeling like I'm out here in a single chair to spotlight. I was just at the other end of a board table. I guess I could have gone and kind of sat closer to them, but I felt like I was just falling in step. That's where I'm supposed to sit. So I sat down at the other end of the table. And the questions there were bouncing between a structured interview process. They had very specific questions that they were asking, and they asked about integration of technology. They asked about inclusion and equity. They asked about classroom management, not only from a behavioral perspective, but on a technical perspective, because the job that I was moving into could be 16 kids in 16 different courses. It talked about my perception, or I guess my skill set at integrating multiple layers of leadership. So school-based to community-based to system-based. So what does that look like? And that sort of movement back and forth. And those are questions that had popped up in other frames as well. So I had in the same year before I got the job in my current job, I also interviewed for a position of responsibility, so a department head, and that was in the principal's office, specific school. They said to you, here's the list of questions. So it was laid out in front of you, and there were similar questions. This questions there shifted slightly more into a not just what you know, but what you've experienced. And within this, if we're decoding here, I think that's a key thing to point out for individuals that are coming into any job interview within education, because there's so much information out there. You can study for an interview. You can come up with the buzzwords. You can sort of throw down information from a website that you read just prior to stepping into the interview. But the flow of the interview strips you of that knowledge in this single way. Speak to your experience now. And so you can kind of talk to the theory about what your belief system is or what your mission statement is. But the measurement of leadership comes from whether or not you've actively have lived experience in it. And that is something that this job interview is, I found, and I've had several job interviews over my time in education. I've felt a palpable change that they're leaning more on, okay, that's great, cool, you've got the buzzwords. Now tell me about direct experience in that moment. So really, I think that's a key. If I were giving away a key here, as in ripping apart what interviews are about, is that you while you're prepping for change in your job, don't get too caught up in the books. They're important. The website information, read the weekly emails that you get from the board. Like, you got to be on the edge of the information, but also be connective in your own practice. I think reflective practice is a good way to prep for any interview, but you got to be doing it long before you arrive at the interview. I feel like I can sort of manage a good interview because I've done a lot of thinking about my work. And it's equal measure of thinking about doing something, then doing something, and thinking about what I just did. Yeah, you got to have the both. You got to have the both. So that's my interview experience. I'll speak to, so the new position I'm moving into was one of the longest interviews I've ever had. It was an hour and 22 minutes. Yeah, an hour and 22.
That's
Maybe
crazy.
let's shift it. And it was, there was, when I sat down, it was two principals. It was the principal of the school and the vice principal. They each had it was sort of like a graphic organizer that most times there'd be a lot of scribbling on. But I would say that 90% of that interview was conversation. And the further step is that the position that I ended up taking was not the position that I was going there to interview for. Something happened in that interview where we started discussing some other things based on my lived experience. So I had my resume based on some of my experiences, based on my interests, based on our conversation, very organic there at the table. And the principal at some point said, okay, and this is a pivot. You feel, and the body language and everything plays into it. So it was sort of like the okay moment says, okay, so this is all cool. And I feel like it's on point. And then she looks me in the eye and she says, would you be interested in? So something changed. And then we ended up discussing that. And I ended up going for the other thing. So I don't think that's a common experience in interviews. I think often there's an expediency to it. You're sort of applying. This is what we're going to talk about. Let's sort of like tick off the boxes. If we have the time for the questions afterwards, which happens as well. But the questions, there were no questions afterwards for me. All of those were embedded along the way. There wasn't is there anything that, because that's something that happens in interviews. Okay, Chris, is there anything else? Is there anything else that you'd like to ask before we conclude this interview? That didn't happen at this interview. All of that was laid on the table. So you end up walking away like having a complete story, which is a little bit different than what I've experienced in the past. So, yeah.
Awesome. I mean, I love I love that how you talked about for one of the positions you had to go to the board office because there's no known schools, like a centrally located thing. For me, I have to say I ended up interviewing at a school, and there were two principals. The one principal was asking the questions, the other principal was writing down my answers and kind of taking notes. And I have to say that the principal was when I got called for the interview, he was very open to like just outside the box. Like, do you want to do it in the morning before school? Do you want me to come to your school? We could do it on your prep time or your lunch time. Because he was like, if we don't do it that way, then this is what it's going to look like. It's going to be after 4 p.m. at the school. And like, he's like, let's just do this. And it was perfect because it was just it was refreshing, to be honest with you, because it was like so out of the box. For example, the principal, so I applied to a school, and the principal at my kid's school right now is the one who's being moved to the school that I applied to work at. And the principal at that school is being moved to the school where my kids go to now. So it's like it's a flip-flop. He's going to her school, she's going to his school. And so it's kind of a really neat connection. So what happened was I said to him, well, I can get to your school tomorrow morning. I can bring my kids with me. I can get there earlier than when my kids are supposed to be there. And if it's okay with you, they can sit outside the office and read while we're interviewing. And then at a certain time, they can go outside because that's where they're supposed to be at that time. And he was like, let's do it. So I was in awe of the freshness, and the openness, and just, oh yeah, bring your kids. You're dropping them off anyway, so just bring them with you at this time. They can sit outside the office and read, and we can interview. And then, 15 minutes after we start, they can head out for their morning stuff while there's somebody on duty. And then here's the other thing that I loved about it was that when I got there, I sit my kids down and I'm like, okay, you guys be good, because I know how they can be, right? You two be good. You're in the school. You're not supposed to be, but we're making an exception because dad's got a meeting. Just chill, read, don't bother anybody or yourselves. The two principals come out to welcome us. And it was awesome because they're everyday principal they love. So they're just chatting. And then he introduces them to the new principal who worked with my mother-in-law years ago. So there's she says, I know your grandmother, and now the kids are feeling good. I'm feeling good because of the way my kids are being treated. And I've mentioned that several times on this podcast. I want my kids to go to school. I want my kids to feel good about where they are and good about the way that people treat them. That's what I want them to feel, right? So they're going to learn their math, they're going to learn their language, but I want them to be happy where they are, and I want them to get along with people. So the fact that these two individuals come out, I'm nervous as heck, right? Because I'm about to go in for an interview, but they're chatting up my kids and they're making connections with my kids. And so it started off really nice. It started off very convenient for me and for them because they parked themselves at the school where they both need to be familiar with. And there you go. So, I mean, it doesn't always work that way, but it was nice. It was a nice way to deal with this whole thing.
Yeah, it's very cool. I had some similar, one of the things, this is a good topic. So there's different paths to apply for jobs within education. Sometimes it's formally structured as in the opportunity is open for X amount of time. So they'll say that the posting comes up, and they'll say this posting is open for 7 days. So within those 7 days, you'd have multiple people applying, and then you sort of wait to be called, and then the interview would be set up. And with our school board, we have a Apply to Education. It's a website that we apply to. So the jobs, when the job comes up, some of them would be posted to this Apply to Education. So this would be the department heads, centrally allocated positions, and they tend to be posted there. You know what? I don't know what the tipping point is, but some of them would be posted there. I think it has to do with the timing and the time in the actual semester and how quickly it has to be kind of fixed or filled in the school. Mine, I was it was applying for a job, but it's considered a transfer. And within that, the way that it goes is that these vacancies, so the schools, so the cascade effect typically is first jobs that get opened up are the department heads. So people apply to be a department head. Once those are filled, sometimes people are moving up to department headships, or sometimes department heads are moving between schools. So once those leadership positions are filled, then you know where some of the placements might be open within your school. So then those would be posted. So those sort of vacancies at a school, and it would be posted as, some school has a 1.0, which just means you'd be a full-time teacher for math. When it's on that vacancy list, the method there is you don't apply to the system. You phone up the principal, or you send an email to the principal with your resume attached, and you just say, I am interested in having a conversation. It's not actually called an interview. I'm interested in having a professional conversation. I actually shouldn't put the air quotes. It is. You have a professional conversation. I'm not being facetious. And then the principal says, okay, we are talking here, here, and here, and here. Here's the spots where we have available. These are very quick turnarounds. Sometimes these are 3 or 2 day turnarounds where they're sort of looking to put someone in the position. So the flexibility is of paramount importance. So from the point that they closed the offer, which let's say was on a Wednesday, I sent out because they won't actually make contact with you until after the position closes. Like, they're not reaching out. Let's say there's a 3-day window. If you put your resume in on the Monday, it's not like they're calling you on the Tuesday to say, okay, we'd like to set up an interview. So the 3-day window closes on the Wednesday. On Wednesday, I get a phone call saying, we'd like to set up an interview. Thursday morning, the best that I can do is, so Wednesday I get the call for an interview at Thursday after school. Thursday after school is already booked with stuff for my family. So that was hilarious. I'll save the story for another time, but it was basically meeting at a central location, me bringing the kids there, handing them off to my spouse taking them somewhere, then me going and getting the kids from there. And we ended up staying in that space altogether, but then I take the kids home, and then my spouse has to wrap something up there and comes home afterwards. It was hilarious. Like we're sort of trading children in a parking lot here, you know? And, but the interview worked. At the point that I was going to that interview, so as I'm going to that interview, I had already had to make arrangements for another conversation, that was supposed to occur the next morning. I came out of this interview and I was like, this is good. I think I want this. So then I'm going back, we talked about this. I had already put in for my absent time the next morning because it was during school time. Lesson plans had already been created. We talked about the whole morning routine. I'd already set that all up. You know, the what if I can't make it in, it's all set up. So then I got to pull the absence out. I got to get in contact with the principal that was going to talk to me and say, I've accepted this other position. I'd like to sort of, I'm not going to come to this interview. I appreciate your time. And in the time that I sent that one, I got another email on the Friday saying, can we have a conversation? So there were 2 other positions that said they were interested in having a conversation that I then had to email and say, and the reason that this is important, why I'm sharing it, is that it's okay. It's okay to accept that first position. I wouldn't have applied to it if I wasn't interested. I would say I also felt it was okay to send the email to the principal, say, I found it respectful just to tell them I'm not going to come to this interview. And I did it as soon as I could, knowing full well that principals had to make decisions by Friday, 3:00. So that was a little bit there. And it can happen tight. It can happen tight. You know, my advice would be is don't apply. Don't go on a fishing. It's not a fishing trip. Be intentional. Apply for what you want. Because you got to train. Apply for what you want, right? You're not just dropping your hook hoping that there's fish there. You're going in knowing that that fish is there and you're going to try and catch it.
It's not a fishing trip might be the title of this podcast.
There you go. It's not a fishing trip.
Hey, thanks for indulging me with all that. I appreciate it. I feel like our show is about something today, even though the first 90% of it was about a ton of other stuff. And then we ended with this 10. Do you have any final words for this week's podcast?
No, I don't think so. I'm good. Left it all on the table.
I know that this week. I know you have to go, but I'm going to pull a Clough. I have something I want to end with. It's like homework.
Yeah.
Okay. Nicholas Provenzano is an educator in the States. He's out of Detroit. I have to say I know him. He's from the Google Teacher Academy. So I've met him and I think he's a great guy and I follow his blog, and he blogged on Sunday, May 27th. The title of the blog post is called Maker Fatigue. And basically he's saying, oh my God, I'm sitting here at home. I look around my workroom and all of my tools lay dormant, almost mocking me. Okay. I've been so focused on helping everyone at school. I feel like I have lost the creative oomph that I have that sparks my maker impulse. Is it possible to have maker fatigue? And then he ends with, I wonder how many makers out there have felt this type of fatigue or block. Is this something you are not supposed to admit? Does this make me a bad or flawed maker? I'm not sure the answers to this, but it can be frustrating to want to make, but don't seem to have anything that appeals to you. If you've been there, I'd love to hear how you've dealt with this. This spoke to me like you wouldn't believe. This blog post came screaming out at me because this is me. Because I don't feel like I have any talents or gifts in making, but I love to make. But I've never admitted that to myself because of the way the maker spaces have become these days. So I'm leaving this with I want you to consider, whoever's listening, are you a maker? Do you consider yourself a maker? And are there times where you feel like making, you just don't know what to do because there's nothing, you don't feel a particular pull in any way, but you just feel like creating. And I have to say, that's why I started my podcast, because I wanted to create content and it was something I was comfortable with. And I felt it was something I wanted to do. So I did it. Anyway, that's what I wanted to put down for for homework.
I love it. And if I think there's a really cool connection between Provenzano and Jen Mac Brown. I think I don't know if I think I'm getting her handle right, Jen Mac Brown, and I think she's in Peel Board. And she is someone that I met last year, 2 years ago, and she was librarian developing a maker space. And one of the things that she used to address that was she developed her program entirely based on what she observed the student. It's like, sorry, I want to rephrase this. Part of her developing the program was making sure she was staying pace with what the kids wanted to do. So one of her first leaps into maker was doing sewing. Now, she had very little experience coming into this, or not the experience that would be the prototypical, I have a bunch of random gear at home that I love to put together. Like, it wasn't that start. And her process, she's blogged about it. She's spoken about it, and she's willing to connect about it. I like that as I don't know if that's the medicine for Nicholas right now. Maybe that's the method to keep that kind of refreshed. And his context might be that he's in a specific place where he's supposed to just teach that thing. Do you know what I mean? Just teach that sort of maker in the tech. I remember I followed him before. I don't know if I follow him now, but I think that idea of refreshment is that if you're uncomfortable or slightly disconnected, is it in the disconnection? Like, is disconnection the outcome or the challenge that you need to put to yourself? As in, how do you now disconnect from what you believe you should be doing in order to get some perspective on it? How do you get away from it? I have no doubt, I can only look at my pencil crayons and my markers that I have set up to the side here. And if it's not inspiring me anymore to make anything, then I need to get them off my table. I need to put something else there that reminds me of what I know I enjoy. And the only pushback that I'll do is like, that's partially what my 2-month time away from Twitter did. I had to take it off the table. I had to take it away from being right in my face to, well, actually, I'll say social media in general. I had to walk away to figure out the pieces that I wanted to keep. But maybe we talk about that next week.
Awesome. Maybe we do. I'm going to certainly take that last clip and make sure Nick watches it, because I think we're trying to answer his question, and I love what you threw down. And I love what you said about Twitter and how sometimes you need to walk away from it in order to know what's important to you, and then you come back.
Yeah, I want to push. I'm going to reinforce that. I actually firmly believe that you do intentionally and actively have to walk away from these tools. Now, a 2-month hiatus, you don't have to go that long. But I think the sort of like stripping it down to the desktop to see what pieces are there for you. One of the cool, there's dudes that started that whole minimalism movement. I forget their names. There's an interesting documentary on Netflix. And there's another person, I forget her name, but she's like this Uber organizer. I used to follow her on Twitter. But one of the methods of sort of getting to what's essential sometimes can be, if you're not prepared to just go like, I'm done, and push everything off the desktop, like you're squeegeeing your world, is to spend specific time with every single element and make a decision with that exact camera, webcam, do I want you anymore? And then I come to the decision that I do not want you anymore. I want something that, I'm talking to my camera. I want a camera that's going to work. I'm sorry, that means I have to get rid of you. And then it's gone. Make the quick decision. So you can kind of go 2 ways. If you have the type of bravery just to kind of scrape it down to the skin, then go for it. The counterpoint might be just spending specific times with things. Look at your pencil crayons. Are you still where I want to be? No, put it away. You look at your clay. No. You look at your robotics. The problem is that the size of your body of work will tell you how much time you have to spend.
Right on. Thanks, Chris.
All right, man.
Okay, until next week.
For sure. Thanks for the chat.
Thank you. Talk to you later.